The plant genus Alocasia is one of my favorites to grow as a houseplant because of how beautiful and varied the foliage is across species and because of how fun and easy they are to propagate. Caring for Alocasia can be a little bit of a roller coaster at times in my experience, but they're very rewarding plants to grow once you understand their needs. In this video, I'll talk about some tips I've learned for growing Alocasias while drawing a few different species. Then I'll show you the Alocasias I currently have in my own collection, and I'll talk about the various successes and struggles that I've had with these plants over the years. And last, I'll talk about the process of illustrating the Alocasia genus for the Happy Houseplant deck and coloring book. By the way, my name's Caitlin, and I'm an illustrator based in Brooklyn, New York. I'm also the author of The Illuminated Tarot and The Happy Houseplant, an illustrated plant care deck that I'll talk a little bit about at the end. Now let's draw and have a little plant chat. I'm drawing here in a new sketchbook that's from Ugly Books, and it has this yellowish greenish paper, and this is my first time using this sketchbook. And I'm also using my favorite Pentel pocket brush for the lines, and later on I'll use Posca and Molotow acrylic paint pens for color. I mentioned in the intro that Alocasia care has been a roller coaster for me, and maybe it's more accurate to say that as a houseplant, the circle of life just moves a lot quicker. On one hand, they're very prone to pests, and on the other hand, they put out these little bulbs called corms that you can grow into new plants. I'll say more about propagation from corms when I show you the plants that I have in my own collection. There are just so many different and interesting species that you can find in plant shops relatively easily now, and they're just really cool and prehistoric looking. For this drawing, I started with a species called Alocasia Tiny Dancer. Most Alocasia species have larger, bolder leaves, so I thought this would be a nice change in scale for the center of the composition, that I could sort of weave them in and out of the bigger leaves. And then on the right-hand side there, the second one I drew was a Alocasia Stingray. Right now I'm drawing, it's called an Alocasia Frydek. On the far right is an Alocasia Cuprea. It has sort of like reddish leaves. And now I'm drawing Alocasia Silver Dragon, which is another favorite of mine. This genus is native to Southeast Asia, where it grows in the rainforest understory. So Alocasias definitely appreciate humidity, as that's closest to their natural habitat. The genus Alocasia belongs to the Araceae family. Monstera, Philodendron, and Anthurium are other genuses within this family. And all of these plants like to be in a loose, airy soil mix, but unlike Philodendron and Monstera, Alocasias don't climb. These plants like their growing media to dry out a little between waterings, but at the same time you don't want it to get too dry, because that's when you start to have pest issues, especially spider mites. And I'll show a photo that I found online of what spider mite damage can look like. They make leaves look sort of like faded and dusty, and when the problem gets worse, you can actually see little webs on the leaves. Regular watering, humidity, and wiping down both sides of the leaves regularly with a slightly damp cloth would be a good preventative measure. Just keep in mind that for species that have velvety leaves, like a black velvet Alocasia, you don't really want the leaves to stay wet because the texture holds moisture there for longer. So ambient humidity is great, but you don't want water sitting or pooling on the leaf surface. I know the phrase bright indirect light is kind of vague. I would say that ideally you want to place it in alocasia close to an east or north facing window, or a few feet away from a west or south window that gets stronger light. Depending on your climate, I'm in the northeastern US. Alocasia will naturally go dormant indoors in the winter, but they don't necessarily have to go dormant the way that something like a caladium does. The first one I had was an Alocasia poly, and that's the one I drew on the far right here in the background. It's the most common one that you'll see for sale as a houseplant, and I always had it in natural light as opposed to a grow light. And the first winter I had it, it dropped all but one of its leaves and looked really sad. But then it did grow back again in the spring. So now, unless I have some supplemental light, I expect that an Alocasia getting window light will lose some leaves in the winter. My phone ran out of space while I was filming this, so I'll show you the final drawing at the end. Next, I'll show you the alocasias that I have in my collection right now. One of my favorite plants right now is this Alocasia cuprea that I bought. I don't know if it's cuprea or cuprea, but I'm going to say cuprea. I bought it at a shop in Beacon, New York called Flora Good Times when I was visiting friends who live there. So it reminds me of my friends and that visit. And the planter also was a gift from another good friend. It's definitely outgrowing this pot, but it just looks so nice in here that I'm hesitant to change anything. It has grown like crazy because it's in what I call the VIP area under this Soltec light. And it's currently growing in inflorescence or a flower. I know a lot of people cut the flower off so the plant can focus on making new leaves instead of growing the flower, but I tend to just leave it alone and let it do its thing. For this next one, I'm starting off with some historical photos, so you know things are about to go downhill. This is a black velvet alocasia that I got as a small plant from my local garden center, and I grew it under a grow light where it was growing so amazingly well and put out tons of corms, which grew many new plants. All of these plants I either gave them away or I sold to support my plant buying habit. These are photos of the whole family when the parent plant was at its fullest and healthiest. Corms are these little bulbs that Alocasia put out that you can often find in the soil when you repot the plant. And one way to grow these is to propagate them in water, which is what I'm doing here. When I've done this, I found that it worked better to remove a little bit of the outside bark so that there's some green or white showing, and make sure that only half the corm is in the water, otherwise they can rot. I either cover these with a clear cover, like a takeout container cover, to make a little terrarium, or I put them in my IKEA greenhouse cabinet, which I'll talk a little bit more about shortly. Once they have roots, you can plant them pointy side up in potting mix. If there are no leaves yet, I continue to keep them in as much humidity as I can, which I did here by putting a little jar over the top. Recently, I've had even better success in planting corms right side up in moist sphagnum moss. I haven't had to remove any bark when I grow them this way. I recommend saving those tiny condiment containers with lids that come with takeout and upcycling those into little tiny corm terrariums. Sadly, this is all that's left from that original plant. It got too large for the grow light I had it under, and when I moved it to the window, it started dropping leaves. And this was also during the fall when the days were getting shorter, and that made everything worse. So I tried moving it to a brighter spot, but it continued to decline, and then it got spider mites, and now we have what you see here. I did find corms in the soil when I repotted it, so those are thankfully growing into new plants, so it does live on now in another form. I actually got this Alocasia Frydek as corms from an Etsy seller, so that's another hot corm tip. It's much cheaper to ship corms than it is to ship a plant, and easier. This plant has had thrips and spider mites, but it seems to be recovering, and it has started to grow a few baby plants. And then this other one was a little surprise that popped up next to another plant. I must have reused the soil that plant was in for something else, and a corm that was in that soil grew into this little guy. This last one is an Alocasia Silver Dragon, and I got this from a Facebook Marketplace seller in 2020-ish. They're pretty easy to find now, though. This has been consistently pretty healthy. I did move it a few times, so I think that's why it's still relatively small. But it's been in the spot where it is for a while, so it's finally growing a bunch of new leaves, and I won't be moving it. The area where most of these actually live is below an obstructed west-facing window, so that's now my designated Alocasia area. Now please imagine that I Will Remember You by Sarah McLachlan is playing over this next part. My illustration of this genus for the Happy Houseplant deck went through a few iterations. If you saw the Monstera video, there was a similar process where the original version had a cat in it, and specifically my cat Diego. But I revised the art because Alocasia are toxic to pets. I call it toxic because if your pet eats it, they will get sick, but it's not deadly like some other plants in the deck that are labeled poisonous. I moved Diego to the money tree illustration where he could menace the goldfish in a non-toxic environment. In real life, I'm very lucky because he doesn't care about plants at all unless they're dangling right in front of his face. Since Alocasias like humidity and don't grow as huge as some of the other humidity-loving plants, I thought this would be a good place to put an IKEA greenhouse. I have one that looks similar to this that I'll show you on screen. If you're interested in how to set this up, there are tons of great IKEA greenhouse setup videos on YouTube. I'll link to some of my favorites in the description. On the back of these cards is the basic care info, including pet safety, whether or not it typically flowers indoors, and how to propagate it. The same info is on the back of the coloring book version, and it's perforated so you can tear these out if you want. This illustration has many of the species I drew earlier, plus this Alocasia zebrina in the foreground, which has these cool black and white stripy stems. And speaking of that drawing, here's the finished version. That's it for this video, but please subscribe if you'd like to see more like this, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.